I can't take it anymore. When I first decided to move out here in the middle of nowhere, it was for the peace and quiet. I lived in the country growing up, but during the majority of my young adult life, I've been forced to live in more urban areas. However, hard work and a dab of good luck has awarded me the luxury of acquiring a quaint little cottage in the middle of God's green nowhere. One would think that the middle of nowhere would be a quiet place, full of chirps from birds and bugs, rustling leaves, and other subtle sounds that go unnoticed in more populated areas. And that's the way it was for a time. That is, until my family had gone. And now, it just won't stop. It's been nearly a week now, and every night, just as I'm falling asleep, the knocking begins. A loud, constant thudding on the front door, too rhythmic, too purposeful to be the wind or some other such natural occurrence. At first, I could barely hear them. I can remember it like it happened just yesterday. It had been raining the night when I had retired to bed. The pitter-patter of those little raindrops helped me to drift off into a blissful rest. The rain must have picked up as I slept, because when I awoke, the world outside my bedroom window was mid-torrential downpour. In fact, I figured that it had been the storm that had roused me, and quite possibly could have. But as the rain and wind began to dissipate, a low, resonant, monotone sound began to emerge from behind it. It was a faint, very faint, rhythmic thumping. It was so inaudible, I at first thought it to be the last few lingering raindrops from the storm well past its prime. But further regression of the storm revealed a persistence I could not ignore. Of course, upon my first investigation, I had no prior knowledge on which to contrast upon, so I had to slowly and methodically follow the sound I could barely hear to its source. This forced me into continuous pauses with pricked ears, probing an otherwise silent house for the direction I should take my next few steps. Then I'd repeat this process. By the time I had honed in on the sound, many minutes had passed. To make things even more curious, when I came to the front door and peered outside the small window at the top, the noise stopped. I mean literally, the second my eyeballs crossed the threshold at the bottom rim of that pane of glass, the dull thudding sound instantly ceased. Outside, there was nothing. Nothing moved except for the gentle, almost imperceptible sway of dark trees against a starry backdrop. There wasn't an abundance of illumination, but enough moonlight provided the means to reassure myself that nothing was there. In fact, the sound itself was so quiet, I was able to brush the instance off as a trick of the mind, possibly the remnants of rain dripping from the roof. The fact was, there was a million possible explanations, but none of those would help me to avoid the work obligations I had the following morning. So, assured that there was nothing trying to get my attention, and a little miffed at myself for losing sleep over what I thought was nothing, I sauntered back towards my bedroom to finish up the last bit of a good night's rest. I must have slept pretty hard the rest of the night, because the alarm was blaring when I opened my eyes, and had been doing so for minutes without waking me. 6 minutes may not sound like a lot to most of you, but I really like to sleep. Because of this, I have to set my alarm to sound off 20 minutes before I have to leave to begin my 20-minute commute. Between showering, shaving, getting dressed, and gathering my belongings for the day, 20 minutes is just enough time to do all this. Now, I instead only had 14 minutes. I could have skipped the shower, but I hate feeling soiled all day long. Plus, I work as a hiring manager in my new position, and smelling like foul body odor would not present the best representation of our company. I suppose I might have noticed the side yard while getting prepared in the bathroom mirror beside the window. If I had had more time to pay everything a little more attention. But when I walked outside to get into my car, I had no choice but to give it notice. The side yard in the back left corner, a place where earth never seemed to grow any grass, always looking barren and freshly tilled. I'll admit, although I tried my very hardest, I could not shake the presentation of my backyard this morning before I left for work. I tried my best to conduct my interviews, ask probing follow-up questions to answers provided by candidates, basically all the guesswork without the crystal ball, and, in my opinion, I did a pretty good job staying on task. Still, that lingering image, the memory of the after-hours knocking, as mild and subtle as it was, during the earliest of morning hours, and deep down, I already knew the two incidents had to be related. But rationale and a universe dictated by logic and physics held my assumptions at bay, for only a madman would claim to make such correlations with such instances. Without the impossible to literally stare into my face, I could not make that leap. However, that very same night, I would get my chance. When I finally did return home from work, after what turned out to be a very long and arduous day, to be honest, the event had all but slipped my mind. I would like to say it was because I had finally wrestled both incidents into reason, but in actuality, the shit-ass drivers where I live and the commute had made me so furious, all of it had rested into the back recesses of my consciousness. That is, until I pulled into the driveway, the side yard completely visible from where I now sat in my parked car. Of course, the sight of the obscurity forced my previous night and morning into the forefront of my thoughts, and once again, I found myself befuddled. At this point, I was more concerned for the barren earth than I was the knocking. Hell, I still wasn't convinced that the muffled knocking noises were even there to begin with. Forgoing the relationship between these two things, I researched any and all causes for the discrepancies presented by the lawn off to the side of my house. Maybe there was too much rain recently. I suppose it could have washed away any seed, I reasoned to myself. Convinced the whole thing was nothing more than a set of benign circumstances, I polished off the night with some Black Ops 3 and a microwaved dinner before retiring at a decent time to my bedroom to hopefully catch up on some of the sleep I had lost the night before. This time, the sound was not only slightly louder, there was no encumbering storm to drown out its noise. I was sure I had heard it this time, and as I lay awake, eyes open, still, and staring into the dark with my ears pricked, it happened again. And now I was sure. This time, I already had a pretty good idea of where the sound was coming from, so I methodically made my way, silently, towards the front door, making that my primary object of focus, to start with anyway. At this time, while I made my approach, my assumption was solidified by the increased volume in the knocking, causing me to alter my plans and head for a nearby window instead. This time, I hoped to catch sight of whatever or whoever was making this noise, thinking that if I spied at them from the side, that maybe surprise would be on my side as well. Near to my front door, there are two relatively small porthole-like windows, only square in shape, and each covered well with closed Venetian blinds. Pulling a seam apart slowly in the middle, I peeked through the now open area, looking towards the door in order to see the source. Once again, the noise had stopped, and there was nobody there. That didn't make any sense because I had heard the knocking only seconds earlier. The perpetrator would have to have had wings in order to abscond so quickly. Yet, in the distance of the dark, getting closer and closer to the back corner of the side yard, I saw what I can only describe as a shadowy mass sauntering away. It was slow, somewhat wobbly on 2 feet, mostly upright, and moving away from the door, but at least a good 40 feet away when I had first saw it. Something that had made that distance in such a short amount of time should not be progressing so slowly. Of course, my initial reaction was to check out whatever that presence was, to call out to it from the porch out front. But again, by the time I'd opened the door, losing sight of it for only a moment, the thing, or things, had vanished, presenting me with nothing but near-perfect darkness and the tranquil sounds of midnight insects and birds. Inspection, curiosity, and frustration held my attention for quite a while after that, but none of it was enough to force me away from bed and subsequent sleep entirely. That night, I had feverish dreams of police, rotten smells, the dead devouring the living, and hateful, vengeful eyes with a burning stare. I would elaborate more fully on the details of these bad dreams and terrible sequences, but upon awakening the following day, I can only remember discombobulated details of no sequential order. In fact, the only real way I knew my dreams to be nightmares is the panicked state that I awoke in. If there was anything of importance to recall, it had been forgotten within the first 5 minutes of trying to remember. All I know is that when I did open my eyes, my body and mind were both at the end of fight or flight response. There were no markings on the front steps or porch, no footprints in the mud, grass, or dirt, nothing to indicate that there had been anything there the night before. But there was. I was sure of that, and I had almost caught a glimpse of it. I was almost self-convinced to go out and buy and then set up an elaborate security system, mainly the cameras, but I figured I would give it one more night to see if the time and expense to go such a route would really be worth it. It would have been, and I have since installed said cameras, because what I saw that night, I'm not even sure if I can bear it again. On the third night, and every night thereafter since, I have been awoken by more than just a terrible, subtle thudding, a very loud, prominent banging noise, as if someone or something has been pounding on the front door without cessation. I'll never forget what I saw, peeking my eyes through those blinds for a second time. The banging stopped, just like it had done on the previous nights, but on this night, I was not greeted with the sight of silent, dark, early morning, but instead with the image of 2 bloodshot eyes glaring inches from my own with a burning, hateful stare, weary yet energized and beaming with rage, yellow and necrotic, unseen in this state, yet more familiar, more recognizable. It took me a second, sure, but that was mostly due to denial. There was no way. That was impossible, yet there they were, reinforced by the 2 pairs of gleaming eyes behind the figure belonging to the figures, both standing motionlessly, in the near dark. It was then that I decided against confrontation and ran upstairs like a little girl, hiding under my covers from both the monsters outside and my penance to follow. The following morning, I skipped work and went shopping instead. It only took me a few hours to hook everything up. I haven't laid eyes on any of them since, only their depiction in the security monitor every single night. They will not leave me alone, and it's not like I can go to the police. But I suppose I've brought all of this upon myself. The dead patches of earth in the side yard and all. Now, the cameras have all gone out, and I can't say for sure. But I think they're inside, because the front door is wide open. Sure, I should have never murdered my wife and kids, but in retrospect, maybe the dumbest thing to do was to bury them all in the side yard.